using the long tail cast on method. To start, drape the yarn over the needle with the yarn from the ball in the back. Using my thumb and index finger, I'll spread the yarn tails apart. I'll tension the rest of the yarn from the ball with my other 3 fingers. I'll bring my needle down to the front hanging yarn and pick it up. Then I'll bring my needle back and wrap it around the yarn before bringing it forward. Now with the yarn I've picked up from the front, there's a loop going around my thumb. I'm going to pass my needle through the loop and let go of the yarn on my thumb. And finally pull both yarn tails tight on the needle. In the beginning, I've casted on 2 stitches. As I continue with these steps, I'll cast on 1 stitch at a time. When knitted in the round, 1x1 ribbing is worked by alternating knit and purl stitches in a single row. To begin, I'm knitting with an even number of stitches on my needle. If you're working 1x1 ribbing flat, I'd recommend knitting with an odd number of stitches to start and end with the same stitch, be it purl or knit. My round begins with a knit stitch, so I'll have my working yarn to the back and knit 1. For the next stitch, I'm going to purl, which means I'll have to bring my working yarn to the front before I purl 1. I'll repeat this sequence, bringing my yarn to the back to knit 1, then to the front to purl 1, till I reach the stitch marker indicating the start of my next row. After several rows, here's what it will look like. It has a 3D effect with the V braids mirrored on the front and back. When knitted flat, stockinette or stocking stitch is worked in single alternating knit and purl rows. Starting on the first row or right side, I'm going to knit across. Working with my yarn in the back, I'll bring my right hand needle into that first stitch facing the back, wrap my yarn counterclockwise from back to front around my needle, and pull out my needle and yarn towards the front and drop off that stitch I had just worked. I'll repeat that for all the stitches in this row. Onto the next row, the work is turned around and it'll be purled across. It's the same method, only this time facing forward. I'll bring my right hand needle into the stitch facing the front, wrap my yarn counterclockwise once again from back to front around my needle, and pull out my needle and yarn towards the back and drop off the stitch. After several rows, the V or braid-like pattern will begin to show on the right side of the work, while the wrong side has garter-like bars. When the knitting is complete, it's time to cast off or bind off. For me, I'm working stockinette, so I'll be casting off on the right side of my work. I'll be starting by knitting 2 stitches to my right hand needle. I'll always have 2 work stitches on the right hand needle in order to cast off. Once the 2 stitches are on the needle, I'm going to bring the outer right stitch over the inner left stitch using my left hand needle and drop it off. Now I've casted off 1 stitch. To continue, I'll be knitting 1 stitch onto my right hand needle, then use my left hand needle again to bring over the next stitch to bind off. I'll repeat that till the end of the row. In the end, you'll have a single horizontal V or braid that's the cast off. Here's how to shape the center ribbing on a V-neck. Knit until 1 stitch before the center stitch. With the yarn in the back, slip the 2 stitches onto the right hand needle. Then according to the pattern, knit or purl the following stitch. Next, carry the slip stitches with the left hand needle and pass the stitch over. A center braid forms as the column of stitches before and after lean towards the center.